Good evening and welcome to Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. I'm your host, Joshua Solomon, and with me, as always, is the Honorable J.P. Marzullo.
Wow.
I'm batting about 50.
Yeah, 50-50.
Right? Yeah, so.
Yeah.
Oh, it's hot, isn't it?
It's really hot. I think
brutal.
I'm going to really go to church
My truck
more.
said 93 when I got into it today.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to go to church more. I don't know why, but if this is what hell is like, I do not want part of it. I couldn't do it. Couldn't do it. But this has been a pretty hot day today, though. And in fact, we actually didn't break a record that was held in Manchester like last year.
Really?
Yeah, it was 96 last year, I believe.
It still seems so early to be this hot.
Well, that's because we had no spring.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We went our typical thing right from black fly season to summer.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hate that.
I saw a lot of black flies today.
Yeah.
Black fly season is here.
Absolutely.
JP, why don't you introduce our guest?
So tonight we have with us Anne-Marie Banfield, who is an activist for parental rights and concentrating on education. However, she's a wealth of knowledge in some other areas, which maybe we can get to today. So, how are you doing?
Good.
It's been a lot of years, hasn't
I
it?
love the warmth. Bring it on. Oh, yeah. After the winters we have up here, bring it on.
This winter wasn't that bad.
No,
There's only a couple of,
no.
I don't like being cold either. I like being on my motorcycle, but oh my Lord, the number of motorcycle accidents in the last week, it just makes you stop and think.
Yeah, tons of them.
So,
in fact, I think we have the highest rate of deaths in automobiles, not even counting motorcycles, that we've had in a long time.
Really?
Yeah, it's like 28 at this time of the year, I'm saying.
At one point, about 10 or 15 years ago, the last time I saw a statistic, New Hampshire was the highest motorcycle ownership per capita.
Wow.
Like, as far as, by population, we have more motorcycles than, at least at that time, than any other state.
That's because
it's because we have such a great place to ride.
Yeah,
right. We
windy
got the mountains,
roads,
we got
mountains,
the beaches, right? I mean,
right.
But man, it's getting dangerous if you're a rider.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So, Anne-Marie, why don't you tell the folks what you're doing and maybe touch on some subjects that parents need to be aware of, but not just parents. I just think any interested person.
Sure. So, I'm a parental rights advocate, but I focus on education. So a lot of times people will, be going through a court case, and I'm like, nope. I don't deal with those issues. I deal normally with what's going on in the school and making sure that parents are supported. And so I did that. I started doing that when my kids were young. They're like in their 30s now, 20s and 30s. And I did that really for my own purposes. I just really wanted to make sure my kids got a good education. So I really started researching education and looking for what makes up a good quality public school, or what makes up a good quality school, period. And, back then, this is over 20 years ago, I noticed that, there were a lot of people that just wanted to funnel money into schools. And clearly, schools need money to function.
Sure.
But I wanted I wanted more. I just didn't think that was going to be the solution. And it's not really the solution. I think we all know that just funneling money in is not going to fix your schools. You really got to get into the depth of the school. So I've really made it down to three things that I think makes a school, or can make a school, successful. And if you have any of these things missing, then it's going to be a problem. And the first point is you've got to focus on academics. No matter what the excuse is, you have to give kids good quality academic instruction. You got to use good materials. You need good teachers in the classroom. That has to be the priority. That has to be number one. And unfortunately, it's not number one for we can talk about that. And then the second thing is they need to be safe. When your kids go to school, they need to be in an environment where they can learn and feel safe in a school where they're not going to be bullied, things like that. So those are really the two main goals, I think, of a school. And then the third one is you've got to have parental engagement, and it has to be respectful, and it needs to be respectful towards the school administrators and the school teachers too. There has to be that working together to help a child. And I think if you can do all three of those, I think you've got a recipe for success. But the problem is, we don't have that. We don't have that in a lot of our schools, and they get distracted, and they're, oh, we need to focus on this, or we need to focus on this, or we need to focus on that, and they make it very complicated. And they do have complicated issues to deal with. I'm not saying that everything's super simple, but at the same time, I think if you're the people running your school, if those are their three top priorities and really, really make it their three top priorities, I think that for the most part, parents are going to be happy with their public school. And when they divert from that, that's a lot of times why parents get upset, or they pull their kids out of a public school and send them somewhere else where they can get those things. So that's really what my focus is. That's what I wanted for my kids, and I think that's, when I talk to parents, that's really their main focus. Good parents. I mean, obviously you have parents that are not always looking out for the best interests of their kids, sad to say. But I think for most people, that's what they want, and so that's what I focus on. And I do it with legislation. I look at legislation every year to see, what can we do legislatively to improve our public schools. I look at, I help parents in situations, maybe there's something going on in their school and it needs to be addressed. We'll have a conversation, we'll figure it out how best to approach it, start with going maybe to the teacher, going to a school board meeting, contacting the administrators, chain of command kind of thing. And let's see if we can figure out how to help these kids and help that family and stay in where they want their kids to stay. And a lot of times it's in a public school. So that's a lot of what I do. I help candidates run for office understand the issues, because quite frankly, they don't.
Right.
They really don't. It's a complicated issue. You'd be surprised. I have a lot of teachers. I have a lot of school board members. I even have administrators who contact me and follow me like on Facebook, and because a lot of times they're not aware of why are we doing this in our school. And I'll say, well, here's why. Well, the federal government, I'll just give you a quick example. Everybody's heard of No Child Left Behind?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that was sunsetted several years ago, and then every student, you may not know this, but every Student Succeeds Act came next. So we no longer have No Child Left Behind. Now it's Every Student Succeeds Act, and I'll call it ESSA. That's what they call it. So that replaced No Child Left Behind.
Is that a federal program?
That's a federal law. It's a federal education law.
And what does that include? What is
so
that?
it's at 1,061 pages of federal law in your classroom. And instead of just trying to take some of the good, maybe from No Child Left Behind, they just came up with a whole
new process.
Whole new process. And so when I have a lot of parents, saying, they're not focused on academics, they're focused on all this other stuff. And I said, well, No Child Left Behind, one of the biggest criticisms of it was that it was so focused on test scores, so focused on proficiency, that they just threw that under the bus. And now they're focused on climate inside the school. And so now I've got parents just pulling their hair out going, I can't get our school to focus on academics. And I said, well, there's a reason for that. That's because your school administrators are trying to please the federal government versus please you as a parent.
Sure,
so those are the kinds of connections they don't make.
So what can we do about something like that? I mean, obviously, you're going to get the feds touting that this law is good for public schools and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, anything that's 1,000 pages long is going to have issues. There's going to be things that just don't work and some things that are just absolutely absurd. Mm-hmm. How do we get around it if it's federal law? What can the school or a parent do if it's federal law?
So let me add something to that. So let me ask the question basically is that, so there's funds given if they have that program in place. So if they don't have it in place or try to change it,
well, that's where I'm getting at.
Yeah, I was just going to say, will they take that away?
Is it only law if you accept the funds, or is it law and you have to accept the funds?
So the federal government clearly gives the state schools money every year.
Sure.
And you have to abide by the laws, for sure, if you're going to accept the money. And I can tell you, we're not going to turn the money down. It's just not going to happen. So even if you don't like it, good luck getting the legislators to say no to the federal government. So that's never going to happen. I mean, you just got to be realistic about these things. Would I like it to be where we don't have to answer the federal government and do, of course. I mean, of course. But at the same time, I have to be realistic. And we have to understand that. So in that law, it says that the state has to make a state plan, state education plan every year, submit it to the federal government, and they approve the state plans, or if they don't, they can withhold money. So if our state plan was out of the realm of what the federal government wants for our schools, that means that we would be out of, that they can withhold money. Does it happen? I've never really seen it happen. I don't really see the federal government running around saying you got to do this to get this, but that is the carrot that they hold over us. So the state puts together a plan, state says this is what we're going to do, give it to the feds, and then the feds, sanction it.
So when you're saying the state, you mean like Frank Edelblue? Okay, so that group, not individual teachers or individual SAUs. Okay,
the state. So then the schools have to look at what they need to do to comply. They have to look at, well, now the schools are not going to be graded so much on proficiency. They're going to be graded on climate and culture.
Check the boxes.
Yes. So what does a climate and culture mean to a Biden administration? It could mean something completely different to a Trump administration. What does it mean to a Biden administration? What do we have to do to make our climate and culture acceptable to the federal government? And
you have to stack your library with a bunch of inappropriate books.
You're seeing the culture war in our schools. And that's exactly why you see a culture war going on in our schools right now, because of.
And we're teaching the children to butt heads.
Yes.
By doing that.
Yes.
We're forcing that conversation to take place amongst a group of minors who should be focusing on academics.
Yes.
And we're forcing them to start dealing with climate and culture and LGBT and all of these things that have no place in a classroom. Those issues belong with the parents and the families and adults that don't belong in a school.
I would agree with you.
So what about, I mean, when I was growing up, it was a PTA, and if your parents went and you had a bad report, you would hear about it. You know, it didn't just come from the teachers; it came from your parents as well.
And the PTAs had a little bit of pull on the school board and all of that stuff, and could make changes if the parents got. But now that power has been taken away from the parents by virtue of this money in the law.
Right. So if you have
the PTA has been, just cut off.
Right.
Pretty much,
if you have parents going to school board meetings saying, you're taking time out of the class day to focus on social emotional learning or things that have nothing to do with academics, and my kid needs more help in math, and you're not spending that much time. Now you know why. Now you know that they don't care so much about the academics anymore. They care more about everything else. And so, like you said, it's the culture war now happening in our schools, and parents who want their kids to just learn the academics are really at a disadvantage now. Their family is at a complete disadvantage because the school believes that they need to go in all these directions. Now, I will say this. If you had a superintendent and you had a school board who was really wanting the best for these kids, they could do that. They could make it more academic focused. They could really start, you can ignore some of these things. You don't have to make it picture perfect for the federal government. You have to have some courage. You have to have leadership. You have to have, and unfortunately, we just don't have that.
That's what we don't have.
That's what we don't have.
We don't have folks who are willing to do that.
Yep.
Unfortunately, because it does take work that they don't want to do.
Yes.
There's a lot of well, that would be cool to do, but I really don't have the time. There's a lot of selfishness in there.
I just saw something on that the Department of Education, when it was formed in D.C., since it was formed, nothing.
Like 1975.
Well, nothing has gone up in education. It's gone the other way, right? So but you still have to accept what they're giving you. So like CRT, was that a government program or was that something else? And do they still require people to teach that, or allow them to teach it? Maybe is a better word.
Right. So CRT is short for critical race theory, and that was really taught at the university level, and it's really about
where it belongs.
Yes, through the lens of race.
Depending on your college. I mean, you get to choose the college you go to, right? It's an adult topic. It's an adult subject matter. It doesn't belong with minors. Right.
And
anyway.
and because what we've seen unfolding in the classroom is, wasn't so much, nobody wants to get rid of history. Nobody wants to say, we don't want to teach about slavery. We don't want to teach about...
Oh, no. There's a bunch of people who don't want to teach the correct history, and they want to pretend things didn't happen.
Well, that's up to a good teacher. A good teacher will say, I need to teach exactly what happened. But what we saw with CRT was, and I can give you some examples, it wasn't so much about teaching history anymore. It was about blame. It was about who's to blame. And many of
the oppressor was.
Yes. So your kids are now putting themselves into identities. What's your identity? It's very divisive. Instead of unifying kids, we're now dividing them by their identity. And I saw it in some of our schools, and I got books that they were giving the kids, or that they were planning on giving the kids. I would read them. I would look at the curriculum. I would look at who are the authors of these books and their belief system, which was formulated in critical race theory. So everything is through the lens of race. Everything you look at was through the lens of race. Yeah. And so we had kids coming home in tears, saying, blaming themselves for slavery. I mean, little kids. So these are the kinds of reactions that are happening. And, I think it was Condoleezza Rice. She went on The View years ago, and she said, it's a great interview with her if you can watch it, but she said something like, I want black girls to feel good in their skin, not to be categorized, and I'm paraphrasing because she didn't say it exactly this way, but she wanted to empower them. Yeah. She wanted them to feel good about themselves. And in this kind of message, you're a victim. You're a victim, and you can't succeed because everybody's going to hold you down. And so, as an accomplished black woman herself, not just politically, but musically, she had.
Oh yeah.
She's got like 4 degrees. Yeah.
From Stanford. She is brilliant.
Yes, and she just really spelled it out that she just didn't, and she didn't want other little kids to feel like they are to blame, and that's where we were going with it. New Hampshire passed a law a few years ago that pretty much says, it reinforces our civil rights, that you can't just put somebody in a box like that. You can't just say, because of your skin, you are an oppressor, and because of your skin, you are a victim. You're oppressed. You can't just put people in those boxes. That's racist in itself.
Sure.
And so that's kind of where we're at. We're not seeing quite as much as that. And again, from the parents I talk to, they're okay with slavery being taught. They're okay with this. I think if anybody's gone to Europe, they have quite the history.
Sure.
But if you talk to Europeans, and we go there all the time, they're not ashamed of their country. They know what happened. They know what happened with World War II. And they're not happy about it, and they will tell you the truth about it, but they still love their country.
Right.
And so I think what we've been seeing is that this translates into kids growing up and hating our country.
True.
Instead of teaching them the truth and teaching them honesty. I'm certainly not against teaching kids the truth, but you don't hate your country at the same time, and that's the messages I think that they were doing with that.
Yeah, and the one message that's the most important message about slavery in America is that the United States was one of the very first, if not the first, country on the planet to outlaw it outright. Right? We led the way in fixing this problem, but that's not.
That might have been Wilberforce and
it's all about it's all about reparations now.
Yeah,
where's mine? Where's mine? I don't want to work for a living. Where's mine?
Yeah.
Right? And it's all about blame.
Yeah.
Right? But we can go back and we can teach the real history that not all slave owners were white.
Yes.
Right.
Not all slaves were black. And not all black people were slaves.
How about the abolitionists? Right. Many of them were Christians.
Yes.
You know, fighting against.
Oh, but Christians
slavery.
are evil now.
Yes.
Christians are why. Yeah, I'm not even going to go there. I'm not even going to go there.
Now.
I will get worked up.
Yeah. So that's, you know,
but
we've moved away from that.
We need to teach real history.
Yeah.
Right?
But it is something to keep an eye out for, you know, because you can't just label kids this way.
Yeah.
It violates their civil rights.
I mean, you can see it in the news. Like Biden just spoke at the Howard University all-male black college university, and several black students spoke out against him based on, wait a minute, you know, you're demeaning us by saying these things, and really what he's trying to do is to continue to divide. And Whoopi Goldberg said the other, not that I watch her, but I read a lot, she said something about Caitlin Clark. She said the reason why people like her and she's doing so well is because she's white. And so when kids are taught it from a different level, from a very young age, I can see why that could happen unless we do something, unless the parents step in and say, wait a minute, you know, this is crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, there's other things going on at schools. You mentioned this in a brief discussion in our, it's not a green room, but our other room.
Kind of like a green room.
About medical clinics being set up. I'd like our viewers to hear about that, because I think that seems to be the next step, doesn't it?
Yes.
Well, and it's a slippery slope. So to preface it, everybody, all of us in our generation grew up where every school we went to had a school nurse.
Right, exactly.
And that was your first line of defense if something happened in PE class or whatnot, somebody was hurt, or if you as a student needed meds, your parents would bring those meds to the school nurse, and then you would get them on a particular schedule. That was it. We had a school nurse who was responsible for the entire student body.
And if she really liked you and you didn't want to go to a class, she'd let you stay down there until your class was over. Because you never wanted them to call your mother or father to come and pick you up, that you were too sick to be there.
Right.
So, but anyway, no, that's a good point. So where are we at now with this?
So most people don't know this. And again, this is why I do what I do, so I can share the information. So the next step is what's called a community school. And this model, it's just a model, is something that the CDC came up with. So just so you know where this is coming from, the community school models come from the CDC.
And we've discussed numerous times on this show how truthful and honest the CDC has been over the last 4 years.
Yeah.
So we'll start with that.
Okay. So
we'll lay the groundwork. Yeah, go ahead.
So what does a community school model look like? It would incorporate not just your school building where kids go to learn their academics, hopefully they're learning academics, but they would also incorporate in medical services, far beyond the school nurse. They would also incorporate in mental health services. So it's kind of like a one-stop shop. Parents, I'm not even sure why you're around during the school day, because we're going to take care of everything for your child now when you drop them off at the school door. That's essentially the model. So you have one in Manchester. You have that.
There's a community school in Manchester?
Manchester schools are community schools because they have that connection with AMSCAG. So AMSCAG provides the medical and mental health services for the students in Manchester right now. So
when you say community school, you're talking about like the regional mental health community services. Is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about like Amoskeag also services mental health for Manchester students. They also provide medical services for Manchester students. So these are popping up around the country. So you might find one in Maine. You might find one in, the federal government's funding this. So it's encompassing one large organization that you provide for your students. So your student no longer has to leave the school to get medical services. They can get that at school. They don't have to leave the school to get mental health services. They can meet with the school counselor during school hours.
Of course, at the approval of the parent, right?
Well, that depends. That depends, because I have examples of where parents have not been consulted or approve of some of the things that have happened. For instance, in Maine a couple months ago, made the news, not big news. Big news doesn't seem to be interested in this, but surprise, surprise.
Janet Mills kind of tamps down on that type of stuff. She's the governor of Maine.
Yes. So a girl came home, I think she's 17, so she wasn't real young, but she came home with a bag of pills. And her father said, well, what is that? And she said, well, I went to see this, the school clinic, went to the school clinic, and they gave me Zoloft, which is an antidepressant.
Are you kidding me?
No. Which also gives you suicidal thoughts.
Wow. That's
when
crazy.
I was growing up, if you came home with a bottle of pills, your parents either whooped your butt and or called the police.
Or both.
Now they're giving them to them at school. The father contacted the school and said, what is this? Why are you giving my child
and Zoloft is not a mild.
No.
Zoloft is one of the top tier antidepressants.
Yes. And come to find out, he was, needless to say, an angry father. And I don't know if he was pulling his daughter out of the school or what, but interestingly enough, the DCYF was called on him.
Oh, for God's sake.
So they conducted an investigation of the father.
Instead of
the school, because, well, that's legal now. And he was cleared, clearly.
Sure.
I mean, he was a caring father. But that was, I would say, I think most people would say, looks like retaliation to me for how dare you even question what we're doing with your daughter. In Massachusetts, they put one of those birth control devices in a girl's arm without parental knowledge or consent. Seattle just recently started giving kids cross-sex hormones. Now that I don't know for sure if the parents are approving of that, but you have to be careful. So a parent.
That was happening in Minnesota not too long ago. There's a Minnesota couple who has lost custody of their child because the school was giving them hormones and the parents protested and they took the child away.
Yeah, I don't even know how.
How does that even?
I don't even know how they exist, because JP, you and I know that in order for schools to do things, they need legislative authority.
Yes.
I don't see legislative authority for these school-based health clinics. There's legislative authority for nurses.
Right.
Or let's say a doctor comes into the school to perform some services for the school one day and leaves. I don't know how they are doing this legally, to be honest with you, in New Hampshire. I have asked, I am questioning this. They did try to pass a law this year to put it in statute. And many of us objected to that because of what the problems that we're seeing. I haven't even touched on the mental health yet, which I will do in a second, but there's so many problems with this already, and we only have really one, and then we have, I think there's a couple other schools that are getting this federal money to start these school-based clinics, and they can get that money through UNH. Money's coming through UNH.
Who we support and pay for.
So they tried to put it through legislatively, and that bill was not passed. Because there was an uprising from parents, because we're looking at this going, wait a second, something's, we don't want this. First of all, I would, if you're going to put a bill through that gives legislative approval to school-based health clinic, it should be pages long to say exactly what they can and cannot do. It was like one page. And I'm going, no, because I've looked at other states'
Can
laws.
you remember who brought that forward?
Dan Innes.
Dan Innes.
Who works for UNH.
Senate. Yeah, and he's UNH professor.
Yes.
That's very interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that my concern is, number one, that I don't even know how Muskeg has, I filed a right to know request. They pointed to a law. I read the law. I don't see how the law fits this model, but I'm not an attorney, so maybe I'm wrong.
Right.
But I can tell you that right now, I don't see how they're even acting under legislative approval or statutory approval.
Yeah.
So, which is why I think they were trying to get that law passed. So it wasn't passed.
So it got turned down in the House, probably, if it was presented.
It was tabled in the Senate, so it never even got out of the Senate.
Never even got out of the Senate.
No, never even voted on. So let me get to
But that's a little scary. I mean, just
that they could be operating without statutory authority. Yes.
Right.
So the other part of this is the mental health. So first of all, when you talk about mental health in children, there are different. They're all okay. It's like medical health. You know, you might have a cold, but you might have cancer. You know, there's a wide range.
Sure.
Your school nurse could probably handle a cold, but you wouldn't take your child to the school nurse to say, "Could you diagnose my child? I think he has cancer." And then, would you treat my child? I think he has cancer. Of course not. So when you're talking about mental health, you're talking about depression, you're talking about anxiety, you're talking about suicide, you're talking about serious mental health issues. Those are issues that, and I work with child psychologists that say the people working in our schools are not educated, nor do they have the training to deal with those kinds of issues. Kid breaks up with his girlfriend or something, she's crying, she's upset, goes to see the school counselor. That's one thing. But when you're talking about these other issues, that is something that me personally, now that I know child psychologists, I would not go to a school counselor because I want somebody who has the education, PhD, clinical training, works with these kids. Everything is private, because it's not private in the school, I can tell you that right now. I don't care what they say, it is not private. And that's a big part of the problem. So I'll expand on that a little bit, because I think we need to go a little bit deeper here. So what we have found out, because federal money is coming in for mental health services, everybody said, you know, after the school shootings, we gotta focus on mental health. And I'm going, I agree, but not in our schools. Well, everything gets dumped on a school. So we get federal money coming in with a SAMHSA grant. SAMHSA grant gives money to mental health facilities, gives money to the Department of Health and Human Services. They then put out grant money called Project Aware, goes into the schools, and then they start all of the mental health services. In order to keep that money coming in, we have to report back to the federal government.
That we're treating so many children.
And how is it working?
If you're not treating anybody, if all of your children are well adjusted and they're academically advancing, then you don't need the money anymore.
Well, and so what I found out is that the schools were school counselors, and there were 7 schools last year that had to report back to Keene State. So the Department of Education said, we have to put a report together to send to the federal government on this money, on these programs. They contract out with Keene State. Keene State, you gather all the information, put a report together, send it to the federal government. All these schools were sending personally identifiable mental health information on students to Keene State, the data analysts, without any parental knowledge, any parental consent. The students didn't know. Nobody knew that this personally identifiable.
So somebody in each school was essentially taking the entire population of that school, ostensibly the school counselor, and categorizing all of these children at what level? Grammar school, middle school, high school.
It could be at any level.
And basically categorizing someone without parental consent. So this person, they're essentially giving mental health evaluations to children who may or may not have needed it without parental consent, compiling that information, and then sending it out onto the public record.
Right. So I'm not even done.
My Lord.
I haven't even told you the word. Well, that's pretty bad. So they compile the report together, send it to the federal government. I read the report. It's a marketing brochure.
Yeah.
It's just something that, this is working great. It's all fluff. They send it back to the federal government. Now, in addition to this, there was a Zoom meeting with Keene State, the Department of Ed employee, and some of the people from the schools. And during that Zoom meeting, because I went and watched it, the school people were saying, by federal law, they do have to get consent in order to assess or treat a student's mental health. Are they doing it? I would say absolutely not. In all cases, I've heard testimony from people working in our schools that have basically said that they're not getting parental consent. I can talk about that later if you'd like. So let's say that they're getting consent. During the Zoom call, one of the school counselors said, they were talking about consent. They kept talking, how do we do it? Should we do it? Should we do it over the phone? How should we get consent? And
if you're asking how, then you haven't been doing it up to this point.
Yeah, exactly.
So the counselor says,
exactly.
And this is public because I made it public on Granite Grok. And so one of the counselors says, well, we had to change the permission slip because we weren't getting as many parents signing off. So if we would put on there that your child's going to be treated for their mental health, they weren't signing off. So we had to change the wording so they basically wouldn't know.
To trick the parents.
To trick the parents. This is all on video. This is all on video. And the commissioner knows about this. Some of the legislators know about this because I showed it to anybody who would watch.
Exactly.
Go watch the video. You can see it on the video.
Is this a YouTube video?
This was a Zoom meeting. We got the Zoom meeting, and then I put it up on Granite Grok.
Okay.
So you can
So if
find
somebody wanted to look at it now after this show, they could go to Granite Grok and.
Yep. They would go to authors and they would find me.
You, right.
And then you would have to scroll through my articles to find the one where it's pretty obvious because it talks about mental health and they're sharing mental health information without consent. So you can find it. You can watch the video yourself. But these are the problems that we're seeing with this kind of model in our school. And
who approved the model?
Well, the CDC.
The CDC.
Yeah.
So they just told them you have to do it this way. There was never any.
And of course, everyone who's receiving money under this program and employed under this program, not one of them is going to be honest about it. Every single one of them is going to hide behind, well, this is CDC policy, this is CDC guide. They're going to hide behind CDC, right? Because they believe that throwing that up there gives them an amount of credibility.
That's true. And in the case in Maine, where the father said, I didn't consent, the school-based health clinic said, we don't care. We don't need your consent. We're getting federal money for this. We don't need your consent. Amoskeag, as far as I could tell, Amoskeag requires parental consent right now.
So you keep talking about Amoskeag. I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Well, that's what I was getting at, because I know there are community health centers throughout New Hampshire, right? And these community health centers are responsible for certain areas, certain districts within the state. And we're talking about community school and Amoskeag. So what defines a community school under Amoskeag? What is Amoskeag? So
you would have to go and do what I did and read the Memorandum of Understanding, and it tells you exactly, Amoskeag spells out what their contract is with the school. So what they're going to provide, the services they're going to provide, when parental consent is needed, when data sharing, because this is a big issue. people are, well, the HIPAA law, it's our data is protected. And I say, well, it's different in a public school because that falls under the FERPA law, which is the Federal Education Rights and Privacy Act. And there's a loophole in there when it comes to data sharing. That's how Keene State got that data on those kids for their mental health. Jeez. There's a loophole. If you are an education researcher, now they can share this information without parental consent. Prior to Obama gutting that law, they would have had to get parental consent to share any information. Now, it's just out there, and I tell parents all the time, your child's data is not protected no matter what they say. And the other thing is, your child decides they had a bad day, they're going to go see the school counselor. Number one, if it's Medicaid billed, Biden's trying to get rid of parental consent on Medicaid billing. Number two, if you go see them, they have to code your child. There's no code for normal. So if your child goes in to see the school counselor and they are billing Medicaid,
they're looking for a reason.
There is a code. Now your child grows up and says, I want to go into the military. I want to go be an officer. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
Because they were coded with a mental health issue somewhere along the way.
Sometimes they're getting around that.
Or law enforcement, right?
Yep, they might.
Essentially, the general rule is that if you, as an adolescent, were ever treated for a mental health situation and or prescribed any drugs, you're done. You're not going into the military, period.
You're done. And that's what most people do not know. And I've been telling people, be very careful. Be very careful. If you need to have a chat with your child about going to see the school counselor, which is sad because let's say that they do need, some help or something, or they're having a bad day. Now you have to think about that. You have to think about, is this going to be used against my child if they want to go into law enforcement or if they want to go into the military? When I said that the FERPA law was gutted by Obama, that day that happened, I had an attorney in Washington, D.C. call me up and say, Obama had just gutted the FERPA law. Now there's loopholes. Now agencies can share information about students.
Wow.
Now the Department of Education, U.S., can share information with the U.S. Department of Labor.
With any government agency. Now, I think we all need to realize that none of our information is private and hasn't been for decades now.
Right.
Because because they're starting to get caught with all of this, and in order to rectify it, they're doing this. They're gutting these laws. They're gutting these federal rules so that they can do it and say, well, we may have shared the information before, but now it's legal, so we can keep doing it.
Yeah. So this is our next big kind of issue that we're dealing with in terms of where public education is going. And for parents who think this is awesome, I don't have to take a day off of work, my kid can just go down and see the nurse practitioner or the physician.
Get an annual physical or
dental work.
Vaccines.
Vaccines.
Dental work?
Yes, vaccines. And by the way, we had, I'm trying to think, how many kids were vaccinated last year against their parent consent? One in Nashua, one in Rochester, young children. It was the flu vaccine. They set up a vaccine clinic in the school, and they sent home permission slips to all the parents. And two parents had seen the permission slip and said, "Do not vaccinate my child," thinking that they needed to send it back and that they wouldn't vaccinate their child. What they really should have done is kept it and just not even sent it back, and they wouldn't have rounded up their kid. But because they sent it back saying, "Do not vaccinate my child," they just rounded up all the kids who had sent back the forms and didn't actually look at them, and vaccinated two kids against their parents' consent. Not even like the parent just didn't know and didn't consent, said, "Do not do this," and they did it. Yeah. So these are the mistakes that happen when a parent's not standing there with their child and they're just, getting this kind of treatment. And I want to go back one more spot.
That's fine.
several years ago, and now this is before the CDC community schools. This is back in the 90s. But I want you to understand the mentality of where this comes from, or how far are they willing to take this. There is a school in Pennsylvania, Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. You can go look it up. They rounded up all the 6th grade girls one day and gave them all gynecological exams at school without parental knowledge or consent.
Oh, jeez.
So the girls were crying, they were traumatized, needless to say, they sued the school, the parents did. But my point is, these people, you had doctors, you had people working in the school who thought this was perfectly fine.
They're all mightier than thou, you can't question my authority.
Yes.
I have the power to do
I know
this.
more than you, parent. How dare you even question something like this? That's where they're willing to go. Then you need to be very informed about
It's not where they're willing to go. It's
Yep.
where they've already been.
Where they've already been.
And they're looking for legal cover to continue and even go deeper.
Yep.
That's what they're looking for, and that's what's happening.
Yep. Yeah, and so, in the mental health problems, just to share a couple other situations, I'm sure you're familiar with Columbine, where the kids, went in and shot their peers.
Sure.
Columbine had a program called Death Education. They were teaching death education back in the day. And so they were having the kids go to morgues to see dead bodies. There were kids writing their obituaries in school. And you can see this you can actually go to YouTube and remember the show 2020?
Sure.
So if you put in 2020 Columbine Death Education, you can watch the whole program from 2020. And that's when Tom Jarrell goes and looks at all of this and interviewing the kids.
Desensitization.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the girls that he's interviewing, he's talking to her, and she's like, I was learning about death. They were talking to us about death, and they were doing all this stuff about death. And she goes, and I started thinking about suicide. And then also in that program, they talk to a mental health professional, and he says, maybe this wasn't a good idea. Maybe this wasn't a good idea, because you can, as you go through it, you can see how this is really pseudo-psychology. It's fake psychology. It's dangerous.
And it's also, like I said earlier, it's a subject matter that belongs at home with the child's parents.
Yep.
And as an adult. That's adult subject matter.
Yes.
It doesn't belong in a location where we're trying to educate and focus on academics.
Yeah.
Focus on getting the high school is the absolute base. That's the bottom line. You get through high school, and we have determined as a society that if you've mastered those educational concepts, that you are, at the very least, that the bottom line, able to go out into the world and start being an active member of society, right? Yeah. But that's everything up to that point is not adult. You're right. Not an adult, and it's not adult subject matter. You have to stay away from that.
Yep. And I think it's important to say that a mental health of a child, of course it's important. Absolutely it's important. But then you look at what they're doing in the school sometimes, and you're going, how does that help their mental health? They have access to the internet. They have access, because they're carrying around Chromebooks or iPads all day long, and they're able to access all this garbage on the internet. They now have books that they can access that is not uplifting and dignifies a child. It's all about sexualizing them. You have pornographic books in schools now. All of the stuff that, they're talking about gender and confusing kids on their gender. And then, if you have the CRT in there component, you're nothing but a victim, or you're nothing but an oppressor. Is it any wonder that maybe these kids are miserable? It's not a joyful environment to be in when you're in a situation like that. We need to go back to focus on academics and get out of the culture war and give kids good reading materials. Go back to the classics. Go back to where you're teaching kids about courage and honesty and integrity. But then they wonder why these kids are act the way they do. But it's like, okay, they're willing to blame the parents. In some situations, it is the parents. But what are you also doing, school? I mean, when they walk through that door, you're in charge of them. Why are you allowing these reading materials to mess with their heads and not uplifting that child?
Well, we're in a situation where the teachers and the administrators in the schools nationwide are individuals who came up through that system, and that's all that they know.
Right.
These are people who have grown up in a bad system, a broken school system, and they've been taught alternative history. They've been taught that the more important thing is culture and climate, and all of those things that you're talking about are more important. And these people have then gone on to become the teachers and the administrators. That's all they know. They don't understand that before they started school, there was no national education, there was no Department of Education, right? That was like 1974, it was the late 70s. I believe it was under Jimmy Carter that the Department of Education was formed. Prior to that, we were #1 on the planet for educating our students, and it's gone down ever since. It's never gone up because of the Department of Education. We have a phone call, apparently. We don't have a phone call. I must have missed it. Please call back. I miss it every time because I'm busy talking. But we're no longer #1, and the Department of Education, government involvement destroyed it. It destroyed all of it, because prior to that, school was academics and all academics. Now, there was sports, but that was extracurricular. You were in sports in high school. Absolutely. I know, I've seen the pictures. So school sports existed, the school band existed, art existed. We didn't need the Department of Education to tell us how to do these things, and we landed people on the moon.
Yep.
How many people have we landed on the moon since the Department of Education was introduced?
I don't know, probably zero.
So, that's a cliche. We can land a man on the moon, but we can't. Well, we also destroyed our education system. But anyway, the point I was trying to make is that these people that are now in charge, they came up through the broken system. They don't understand themselves. They think they've got this self-righteous I'm educated and I'm in charge and I know better than you do about what your kids. And it's because they came up through the system. These are people, I hate to say it, when I see a school administrator, a professor in college, you know what I see? I see somebody who's never, ever been out in the real world. I see somebody who grew up and was in school from the time they were about 6 years old, and they're in their 40s and 50s, and they're still in school.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that are teaching us and our children how to live out in the real world, and they've never been there. That's what I see. I may be a little negative, but that's what I see when I see somebody who's teaching our kids this. Good evening. You're on Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. Who's this?
What's that? Simon.
Hi, Simon. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Do you have a question?
Yes. I want to know what type of topics you guys cover on this show. Like how controversial you want to get.
well, we've only got like 3 minutes left, but we're not afraid of most conversations, and you do have to keep it safe for television.
Of course, yeah. Okay. My question for you is, how do you feel about the Israel-Gaza conflict?
I feel like it's been going on for over 2,000 years. I feel like the Muslim religion didn't even exist until the 1300s, yet the Jews have been there for more than 6,000 years. I feel like everyone is glossing over the fact that October 6th was an attack on Jews worldwide. And we need to be supporting Israel in everything that they do to rid that area of all the anti-Semitic Hamas and all of that terrorist organization and all of their funding organizations that fund those people, that includes Iran and Syria and Lebanon. All of those things need to be rooted out, and folks need to learn their history about who was there first.
Yeah, I totally agree. Just a quick follow-up question. This is a little bit trivial.
Go ahead.
What's your favorite New Hampshire grocery store?
New Hampshire grocery store.
Hannaford for me. Hannaford, I think.
Hannaford. I work at Market Basket.
I was just going to say Market Basket, so that's.
I love Market Basket too. I'm wishy-washy.
All right. Thank you for your call.
No problem.
Thanks, Simon. Bye.
That's out of the blue type.
I know.
I don't know. I really felt like I was being set up for something.
But you weren't.
All right, we've only got a few minutes. Remind our viewers your name, how to get in touch with you, and email, phone, website, organization for help.
So my name is Anne Marie Banfield, and it's ANNMARIEBANFIELD, and I write for Granite Grok. So if you want to, I would suggest if you want to know anything about anything going on in education, go to Granite Grok, go to my name, and just put it in the search engine. I probably have written about it, and I probably will explain it to you in an article. But if you need to get a hold of me, I do help parents, and if I can't help you, I'll find somebody probably who can. And it's very simple. It's just my name backwards. It's Banfield Anne Marie at gmail.com. And no E on the Ann. It's ANNMARIE. So it's Banfield Anne Marie at gmail.com. I don't accept money. I try to help parents. Sometimes I can. Most of the times I can. Sometimes I can't. Sometimes it's beyond me. But I'm happy to have a conversation. I'm happy to talk to school board members. I'm happy to talk to administrators, although they normally don't like to talk to me because I expose a lot of what's going on, and they try to kind of keep it under wraps, and I expose what's going on. They should be telling you all this stuff.
That's really too bad. I mean, we had that issue not too long ago about schools hiding, like not just doing things without parental permission, but with parents asking about their children. The school's policy was to actively lie to parents.
Yes.
And we need to nip that in the bud as well. So.
Agreed.
All right.
Thanks for being on.
You're welcome.
We enjoyed it.
All right. Thank you, Ann. And we. I'm sorry. JP, we'll see you next week. I'm going to be on a secret mission myself, and we'll talk about that some other time. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.